Imagine standing at the edge of the world, where the sea stretches endlessly, breathing in tides as old as time itself. The air is heavy with salt, the sky stitched with clouds that move slowly, like ancient travelers who have forgotten where they were going. Beneath your feet, an island, solid ground, reassuring, a place that feels eternal. Palm trees sway in a gentle rhythm, birds circle above, and the shore cradles your steps as though it has been waiting for you all along. And yet, the truth is stranger than the calm before your eyes. Islands are not eternal. They are not permanent havens carved into the ocean forever. Some vanish, swallowed whole, dissolved into the sea as though they were never there at all. No war, no fire, no thunderous destruction, just a silence. A disappearance so complete, it unsettles the heart. For centuries, sailors and explorers returned home with maps marked by phantom lands. Places that existed once, but then slipped away. Some of these vanishing worlds were swallowed by shifting tectonic plates. Others drowned beneath the rising tide. And some were never real at all, perhaps conjured by desperate eyes lost at sea. But the mystery endures. Why do islands disappear? And what secrets lie hidden beneath the blue veil of the oceans? Close your eyes and you can hear them. The forgotten archipelagos calling from beneath the waves. Atlantis may be myth, but there are islands whose absence is a fact. Mysteries written into geological history, stitched into folklore, and preserved in the silent testimony of vanished coastlines. Tonight, we will not chase answers like scientists rushing to conclusions. Instead, we will wander slowly, dreamlike, across the oceans of the mind. We will visit the islands that rose and fell. We will listen to the whispers of shifting earth, the trembling pulse of tectonic plates, and the relentless appetite of the sea. And perhaps by the end, you'll see that disappearing islands are not just geological curiosities. They are mirrors, reminders of impermanence, symbols of how even the most solid ground can fade beneath our feet. So let us begin our voyage together, drifting into the tides of mystery. Let us step onto the shores of the islands that were here yesterday and gone tomorrow. When you stand upon an island, there is a quiet illusion that takes root inside your mind, the illusion of permanence. The soil beneath you feels grounded, steady, unquestionable. It feels as though it has been here long before you arrived and will remain long after you are gone. The palm fronds whisper against the wind as though they have always swayed in that same rhythm. The rocks beneath your feet give off the impression of eternity, and the shoreline marks a border between the certain and the uncertain, the known world of Earth, and the endless shifting unknown of the sea. But the Earth is not a still painting. It is not a frozen scene. It is alive, restless, unpredictable. The continents drift, imperceptibly but relentlessly. The seabed shifts. The crust cracks and reforms. And what feels like permanence to us, as fleeting travelers in time, is nothing more than a temporary arrangement in the grand story of the planet. Islands are proof of this fragility. They rise like breath drawn in, and they disappear like breath released. Imagine an island born from fire. Deep beneath the waves, volcanic vents open, spewing molten rock upward. For years, centuries, perhaps millennia, this process continues. Slowly, the hardened lava builds a mountain rising from the ocean floor until one day, its peak pierces the surface. The sea hisses in protest, and an island is born. Life soon follows. Birds arrive carrying seeds. Plants root themselves in ash. Insects swarm. Crabs crawl onto the new shores. And eventually, humans may come to leave their mark as well. A paradise carved from fire floating on the surface of the sea. And yet, just as easily as it was born, it can be unmade. The same ocean that once cradled it begins to reclaim it. Waves crash against its sides, slowly pulling grains of sand back into the deep. Storms strip the trees, rising seas swallow its edges. Sometimes, a sudden cataclysm hastens its fate. A volcanic collapse, an earthquake, a tsunami. In a single night, the very ground that carried footsteps, laughter, and stories can vanish beneath the waves, leaving nothing but the memory of its shape in the minds of those who once walked its shores. There are countless such stories written in the hidden history of the oceans. Islands that explorers swore were real, charted carefully on maps, only to be searched for later and never found again. Whole civilizations forced to abandon their homelands as the waters crept higher each year, erasing villages, temples, and fields. Some of these disappearances can be explained by science: erosion, Tectonic shifts, sea level rise, others remain wrapped in mystery, their truth lost to the waves. But the essence is the same. Islands are fragile promises. They remind us that nothing we stand upon, no matter how strong it feels, lasts forever. What is land today may be sea tomorrow. What is certainty today may dissolve into uncertainty when the tide turns. As you imagine yourself standing on one of these fragile paradises, you might feel a strange awareness rising in you. You are not standing on permanence, you are standing on borrowed time. The ground beneath your feet is not eternal, it is a temporary gift. And in that realization, there is both melancholy and wonder, because if islands can vanish, so can the certainties of our own lives. Just like coastlines pulled into the deep, the moments we cherish, our homes, our relationships, our memories, are all fleeting. Perhaps that is what disappearing islands truly teach us. That permanence is an illusion, and impermanence is the rule of all things. And so, the story begins, not with a mystery to be solved, but with an awareness to be felt. The earth beneath us is alive, restless, and ever-changing. The ocean is not a static backdrop, but a shifting stage. And islands, those fragile jewels of land scattered across the seas, are reminders that even the ground we trust most is not immune to the pull of impermanence. Centuries ago, maps were not just tools of navigation. They were works of belief, expressions of trust in memory, rumor, and wonder. A sailor would swear that he had seen a cluster of islands shimmering in the distance, and before long, those islands would appear on parchment, inked into the geography of the world, as if they had always belonged there. They were marked with names that carried both grandeur and mystery. Hy-Brasil, Buss Island, Saxonburg. Islands that existed on paper but, curiously, never quite yielded themselves to the test of time. Imagine being a cartographer in the 16th century, hunched over a desk lit only by flickering candlelight. The sea charts before you are scattered with vast blank spaces, terrifying in their emptiness. The ocean, after all, is too wide to know, too restless to pin down. And yet, across these blank spaces, stories drift in with every returning ship. Tales of strange lands glimpsed in fog, of silhouettes of mountains rising where no land had been marked before. The cartographer, trusting the testimony of explorers and their trembling voices, draws the outline of an island. It becomes real not because it is seen by all, but because it is believed by enough. Generations later, when explorers set out to find these places again, the maps betray them. The islands are nowhere to be found. Search parties comb the seas, staring into endless blue horizons. But nothing emerges from the mist. Some dismiss these lands as optical illusions, mirages conjured by weary eyes straining against the horizon. Others wonder if volcanic islands briefly rose above the surface, only to be swallowed again before history could catch up with them. Still others entertain a more haunting thought. Perhaps these islands did exist, but they have since disappeared, reclaimed by the deep. There is something haunting about a map that shows a place that no longer exists. The black lines that form the outline of a vanished shore feel like ghostly signatures, whispers of the Earth's own restlessness. Every missing island reminds us that even the act of recording the world is fallible, that human certainty is as fragile as the land itself. To think of an island not just as lost, but as erased. It is like remembering a dream that no longer belongs to you, a shadow that slips away the moment you try to hold it. And yet, these phantom islands were not mere curiosities. They changed the way people navigated the seas. Ships detoured to avoid them, or to search for them, sometimes adding weeks to their journeys. Sailors spoke of them with reverence or fear, as though these lands were guardians of secrets too great to be uncovered. Some legends grew so strong that they began to blur the line between geography and myth, folding themselves into folklore passed down through generations. But beyond myth, beyond human error, lies the undeniable reality that islands do vanish. Entire coastlines retreat, atolls slip beneath rising seas. Volcanic peaks collapse. What seems stable today may be gone tomorrow. The maps of vanished shores, then, are not just testaments to human imagination, but echoes of truths the Earth refuses to keep still. And here lies the deeper, more unsettling thought. How many other islands have existed, lived and disappeared before humans ever learned to make maps? How many worlds rose from the ocean, blossomed with life, and then dissolved without a witness, without a name? When you look at a map today, clean, precise, saturated with digital accuracy, You may believe it is a permanent record, but somewhere beneath that confidence, the ghosts of vanished islands linger, reminding us that even our maps, like our footsteps, are temporary. The ocean is patient, but it is also relentless. To stand on a beach and watch the tide roll in is to witness one of the oldest struggles of the planet, the ceaseless conversation between land and sea. Each wave that crashes onto the shore carries with it a fragment of rock, a grain of sand, a piece of memory stolen from the earth. Slowly, silently, the sea eats away at the land, reshaping it, redrawing its boundaries as though it were a sculptor dissatisfied with its own creation. Islands are especially vulnerable to this hunger. They are small, fragile, and surrounded entirely by the ocean's embrace. No matter how high their cliffs, no matter how ancient their stones, they cannot resist forever. Erosion becomes their shadow. The waves carve away at their edges, storms batter their shores, and hurricanes sweep across them with the force of entire worlds collapsing in a night. Picture an island in the Pacific, lush and green, surrounded by a protective ring of coral. The reef shields it from the worst of the sea's temper, absorbing the blow of the waves. But even coral is mortal. As the oceans warm, reefs bleach and die, breaking apart into rubble. Without this living barrier, the waves strike the island's shores directly, pulling sand back into the depths. Within decades, beaches vanish, palm trees topple, their roots exposed. Villages retreat farther inland, until there is no inland left to retreat to. And then, the ocean takes what remains. For those who live on such islands, the disappearance is not a distant legend, but a daily reality. The ground beneath their homes grows thinner, the salt water rises into their wells, and the future they once thought was rooted in land now seems as unstable as the tide. They are witnesses to the ocean's appetite, watching as the world they love is consumed grain by grain. But beyond the human sorrow lies a deeper truth. The earth has always been this way. Land and sea have always been in motion, forever exchanging pieces of themselves. What disappears in one age reappears in another. One island may sink beneath the water, while another is born from volcanic fire miles away. It is not destruction alone, it is transformation. And yet, from our fragile human perspective, this endless cycle feels like loss. The sea does not mourn. The sea does not remember, but we do. We carry the stories of lost islands like songs we refuse to let die. And perhaps that is why disappearing islands haunt us so deeply. They reveal to us how vulnerable permanence really is. The sea's hunger for land is not just a force of nature, it is a mirror, reminding us that nothing we build, no matter how beautiful or strong, is immune to time. So when you next hear the waves whispering against the shore, listen closely. In their rhythm is the story of the earth itself, creation, destruction, renewal. A reminder that the ground beneath us is not ours to keep, but a fleeting gift, always waiting to be reclaimed by the waters. Beneath the endless blue surface of the sea, there is a world that rarely speaks, a world of pressure and fire. Here, in the crushing dark, the earth breathes in molten whispers. Volcanic vents open, releasing magma that glows like blood against the abyss. It rises, cools, hardens, and builds. For centuries, unseen by human eyes, the ocean floor swells upward, a mountain slowly sculpted by fire. And then, one day, the surface breaks. Steam hisses, waves churn, the sky fills with ash. From the heart of the ocean, an island is born. New land emerges, black and raw, steaming as though it still remembers the fires that birthed it. To those who stumble upon it, it feels miraculous. A new place in the world, something conjured from nothing. Birds land upon it, seeds take root in the cracks, insects arrive clinging to driftwood. In time, the raw stone softens into soil, and the silence is broken by the stirrings of life. But such islands are fragile children of the earth. Just as quickly as they appear, they can vanish. Some last mere months, swallowed by the waves before they can even be mapped. Others endure for decades, luring life and even humans to settle upon them, only to collapse back into the sea with little warning. The same fire that created them may also undo them. An eruption beneath the waves destabilizing their foundation, or the restless sea grinding their edges until nothing remains but a reef hidden beneath the surface. There are countless examples whispered through history. In 1963, off the coast of Iceland, a new island called Surtsey erupted into existence. It grew rapidly, black lava pushing upward into a world of storm and sea. Scientists marveled at it, watching as it transformed from raw stone into a living laboratory where nature colonized fresh earth. Surtsey still exists today, but others like it have not been so fortunate. Many volcanic islands vanish before they can be named, erased before they can leave a trace upon the maps. Imagine walking upon such an island, knowing it may not survive your lifetime. Every step feels like a borrowed moment. Every wave that crashes against its shore feels like a countdown. The island is alive, but so is the sea, and between them lies a fragile truce that could break at any moment. These islands, born of fire and lost to silence, remind us that the earth is in constant conversation with itself. Land is not static. It is an event, a fleeting chapter in a longer story. What rises in flame may vanish in stillness. What appears permanent to us is, in truth, only a pause in the restless breathing of the planet. And perhaps that is the most humbling truth of all. Permanence is an illusion, and islands, no matter how solid they seem, are proof that even the ground beneath us belongs more to time and tide than it does to us. Far out in the world's warm oceans, where turquoise waters shimmer under endless skies, there are delicate rings of coral that cradle lagoons in their embrace, atolls, circles of life built from the skeletons of tiny creatures. To the eye, they appear serene, timeless, eternal. They are places where the horizon looks infinite, where palm trees sway as though untouched by the worries of the wider world. But beneath this calm lies a secret. Atolls are some of the most fragile lands on Earth. Born from the slow sinking of volcanic islands, they are the last breath of land before the ocean takes it all. Picture it. A volcanic peak rises high above the waves, encircled by coral reefs. Over millennia, the volcano erodes and collapses, its massive weight dragging it downward into the sea. The coral, however, continues to grow upward toward the light, building a ring around the fading mountain. What remains is an atoll, a circle of living stone where once a towering island stood. This transformation tells a story not of permanence, but of survival against odds. Yet survival has limits. Rising seas creep inward, lapping at the edges of atolls, swallowing beaches grain by grain. Storm surges tear through their fragile rings, breaking apart the corals that shield them, and salt water seeps into the ground, poisoning wells and turning fertile soil into barren sand. For those who live upon these delicate crescents of land, the ocean's hunger is not a theory, it is a daily intrusion. In places like the Maldives, Kiribati, and Tuvalu, entire communities face the slow drowning of their homelands. Children grow up with the knowledge that their villages may one day no longer exist. Houses are rebuilt farther inland, only to find that the ocean follows relentlessly, creeping closer each year. Elders speak of shorelines that once stretched farther, of trees that once grew where now only the tide rolls in. It is not a violent disappearance, not the dramatic vanishing of land swallowed overnight by the sea. It is a quiet drowning, a slow erasure, a fading that feels almost like grief stretched across generations. The haunting part is that atolls leave little trace when they vanish. Unlike mountains that crumble into valleys or forests that can leave behind petrified remains, atolls sink quietly, leaving only an invisible reef beneath the surface. One day, a village thrives upon it. The next, the ocean reclaims its place, and the memory of the land survives only in the stories of those who once lived there. And so, atolls remind us of a fragile truth. The ground beneath us can be both gift and ghost. They embody impermanence more delicately than any other landform. Fragile halos of life balanced on the edge of the sea's patience. To live upon an atoll is to live in harmony with the ocean, but also to live with the awareness that the ocean always has the final word. Perhaps that is why disappearing atolls strike such a deep chord in us. They are not just geological curiosities, but symbols of how fragile our place in the world really is. They remind us that permanence is a comfort we create, not a reality we can guarantee. There are places in the world where, if you look closely, you can see the memory of land etched into the sea itself. Faint outlines of shorelines that no longer exist, reefs that once formed the edges of beaches now drowned, ridges beneath the water that tell the story of coasts long vanished. These are the ghost coastlines, traces of islands and lands erased by time, yet still lingering like shadows beneath the surface. Imagine standing on a boat as the tide is unusually low, the sun sinking at your back. As the water recedes, dark shapes appear beneath the waves, lines of stone that form the unmistakable edge of a shoreline. But this shore no longer rises above the sea. It exists only as a whisper beneath the surface, visible only to those who know when to look. The land was here once. People may have walked it, built homes upon it, sung songs to it. Now, the ocean keeps it hidden, showing only fragments as a reminder. In places like the North Sea, entire stretches of land once connected islands and coastlines, allowing people thousands of years ago to walk where now only waves remain. Archaeologists call this Doggerland, a vast plain that stretched between Britain and Europe, drowned as the glaciers melted and the seas rose. Today, fishermen sometimes haul up remnants from this ghostly world, bones of ancient animals, tools crafted by human hands. These artifacts are messages from a landscape that disappeared beneath the waves but has not been entirely forgotten. Ghost coastlines are everywhere once you begin to look for them. Satellite images reveal outlines of drowned islands. Sonar maps trace ridges that were once mountain peaks, now hidden beneath the ocean. Sometimes the land still lingers just below the water, shallow enough that ships must avoid it, though it no longer rises high enough to greet the air. Other times, it has sunk too deep, existing only as a memory in geological records. There is something both beautiful and eerie about these half-remembered worlds. They remind us that the map we hold in our hands is only a snapshot, a temporary sketch of a restless Earth. The coasts we know today are not the same as those that existed centuries ago and centuries from now. They too will have shifted, erased, redrawn. The ocean is always at work, patient in its task of reshaping. To stand at the edge of a ghost coastline is to stand between two worlds, the world that is and the world that was. It is a reminder that permanence is an illusion and that the landscapes we take for granted are fragile, impermanent, subject to the ocean's quiet will. These places whisper to us not with the violence of storms, but with the soft persistence of memory. They tell us that nothing is truly lost, only transformed. And maybe, just maybe, they invite us to consider our own lives in the same way. The things we lose do not vanish completely. They leave behind traces, echoes, ghostly coastlines in our memory. Like the outlines of drowned lands, they remain with us, shaping who we are even as they slip beyond reach. The Earth, like us, remembers in shadows, and the ghost coastlines are its way of keeping memory alive. Not every island that disappears does so under the watchful eye of science. Some vanish first into story, into whispers passed from one generation to the next, until they blur the line between geography and dream. These are the vanishing lands of myth, places that exist not on maps, but in the imagination, woven into folklore like half-forgotten songs. Take Atlantis. The name itself stirs something deep within the human mind. A city of wonder swallowed by the sea. Its towers and temples glittering beneath the waves, unreachable, yet never fully gone. Plato's tale of Atlantis may have been an allegory, a metaphor about pride and downfall, but it lodged itself into history like a seed, and from it grew countless retellings. Explorers sought its location, mystics claimed to channel its wisdom, and even today people search for it in the depths of the Atlantic, the Mediterranean, and beyond. Perhaps Atlantis never existed, or perhaps it did. What matters is not certainty, but the pull it exerts upon us, the dream of a land lost waiting to be rediscovered. And Atlantis is not alone. Sailors once spoke of Hy-Brasil, an island said to appear off the west coast of Ireland only once every 7 years. Some claim to have seen it rising from the mist, shimmering on the horizon, only to vanish as they drew near. Was it a mirage? A trick of light upon the sea? Or was it something more? A fleeting glimpse of land the Earth allowed to exist only for a heartbeat before reclaiming it. There is also the story of Lemuria, a supposed continent in the Indian Ocean, imagined to explain the presence of similar species found on faraway shores. Though later dismissed by science, Lemuria lingers in myth, reshaped into stories of lost civilizations and ancient wisdom hidden beneath the sea. These vanishing lands of myth are more than idle fantasies. They are reflections of our deepest questions about the world. What lies beyond the horizon? What have we lost? What still waits, hidden beneath the surface? They reveal something about us as much as about the Earth. We are creatures who cannot resist the idea of hidden places, of lands that vanish but leave behind whispers of themselves. And perhaps, in a way, these myths are not entirely false. The Earth does erase islands. The sea does reclaim land. Atlantis may be legend, But entire real cities have been swallowed by water. Heracleon in Egypt, for instance, lost to the Mediterranean until divers rediscovered it centuries later. The line between myth and truth, between imagination and geology, is thinner than we often admit. To think of vanishing islands is to think not only of geography, but of memory. What is myth but the Earth's way of reminding us that what seems eternal is not? Perhaps every legend of a lost land carries within it the echo of a truth. Somewhere, sometime, a place really did vanish, and memory transformed it into story. So when you hear of Atlantis, or Hy-Brasil, or Lemuria, listen not for the certainty of fact, but for the deeper rhythm beneath the words. The human need to hold on to land that slips away, to give shape to the impermanence that the ocean writes again and again upon the earth. When you hear the word island, what do you picture? Perhaps a green crown of palm trees, a golden shore, a firm piece of land that seems as solid as the earth beneath your feet. Yet, for many islands across the world, especially those in the Pacific and Indian Oceans, solidity is an illusion. These are not mountains anchored in stone, but fragile rings of coral, delicate skeletons built grain by grain, wave by wave. They are called atolls, and they are among the most vulnerable forms of land on Earth. Atolls are the ghosts of volcanoes. Once, long ago, fire erupted from the seabed, creating volcanic islands that towered over the waves. Around these islands, coral reefs began to grow, slowly, silently, like the patient work of artisans weaving a necklace. When the volcano eventually died, its heart went cold and its body began to sink, pulled down by the weight of its own mass and the movement of the Earth's crust. The coral, however, continued to grow upwards toward the sunlight, creating a ring where the island used to be. Over thousands of years, what remains is not a mountain, but a fragile crown of coral and sand, the atoll. From the sky, atolls look like delicate brushstrokes upon the ocean, rings of turquoise and white, surrounding lagoons so calm they seem to glow. But beneath their beauty lies a terrible fragility. They are built not of bedrock, but of sand and coral fragments, material that can be shifted, scattered, and swallowed by the sea. Waves, winds, and storms are their sculptors and destroyers. Entire stretches of an atoll's shoreline can vanish in a single cyclone, only to reappear elsewhere, reshaped by the restless hands of the tide. Imagine walking upon such a shore. You stand on sand that is not truly land at all, but an accumulation of broken shells, coral rubble, and grains swept here by the sea. The waves crash, retreat, and crash again, endlessly moving what you believe to be solid ground. An atoll is not permanent. It is a balancing act, a conversation between ocean and sky. To live here is to live in dialogue with impermanence. Yet, despite their fragility, atolls have been home to countless generations of people. Entire cultures like the Marshallese, the Maldivians, the Tuvaluans have flourished on these shifting sands, reading the sea as others read books, navigating the stars to find their way between fragile rings of coral. To them, the atoll is not weakness but resilience. It is proof that life can cling to the edge of the impossible, thriving where land and sea merge in a dance of constant change. But even resilience has its limits. Rising seas now creep higher each year. Waves erode coastlines faster than they can rebuild. And what was once a cycle of balance has begun to tilt. Some atolls have already lost their villages to the tide. Others are predicted to vanish within decades, their people becoming among the world's first climate refugees. For the outside world, these vanishings may seem sudden. A headline, a mystery, another disappearing island to add to the list. But for those who live there, it is a story written day by day, tide by tide. Atolls remind us that permanence is an illusion. Land can be born from fire, nurtured by coral, and still be destined to fade. These fragile circles in the ocean stand as symbols of both beauty and impermanence. Rings not of stone, but of memory. And when they vanish, they do so quietly, like footprints in wet sand, erased by the waves before anyone can notice they were ever there. Long before satellites mapped coastlines, before scientists traced tectonic plates and measured sea levels, there were stories. Stories told at night by firelight, whispered across waves, carried from generation to generation like salt upon the wind. Stories of lands that once stood proud above the waters, only to sink beneath them. Legends of villages that vanished, temples swallowed by the ocean, kingdoms that fell not to armies, but to the restless hand of the sea. Such myths are found everywhere the ocean touches. In the South Pacific, among the people of Polynesia, there are tales of islands that drift, appear, and vanish, lands of plenty where travelers once rested, only to find them gone on the next voyage. The Maori of New Zealand tell of Hawaii, the mythical homeland, some versions of which describe a place that disappeared beneath the waters. In India's ancient texts, there are stories of Dwarka, a grand city said to have been swallowed whole by the ocean, its people, temples, and palaces claimed by the waves in a single night. These myths are not just fables. They echo the memory of real events, catastrophic floods, storms, and the slow drowning of coastlines as seas crept higher. For cultures without maps or scientific instruments, storytelling was the archive, the memory bank that carried warnings across centuries. When an elder told of a land that sank beneath the ocean, it was not just myth, it was history carved into words, a reminder that the sea is never still, never fully tamed. Consider the legend of Atlantis, the most famous of all lost lands. First told by Plato, Atlantis was described as a great island nation that, after falling into corruption, was swallowed by the sea in a single day and night of misfortune. Whether meant as allegory or memory, the story resonated across centuries because it touched a truth humans everywhere have felt. Land can vanish, and permanence is never promised. Atlantis became not only a myth but a mirror, reflecting humanity's fears about hubris, fragility, and the merciless power of nature. In the Pacific, many island myths describe ancestral warnings about where not to settle, which shores to avoid, or which islands might vanish. Some stories spoke of gods testing the people, rising seas as punishment, sinking lands as lessons. Others were simply cautionary tales, teaching communities how to live with humility in the face of the ocean's moods. Imagine sitting by a fire on an atoll centuries ago. An elder leans close, his voice steady as waves lap the shore. He speaks of an island not far from here, an island where families once fished and farmed. One night the sea grew restless. The ground shook. By morning, the island was gone. Nothing but open water where homes once stood. The story ends with a warning. Do not trust the land completely, for it can vanish as easily as breath. Today, we look back at these legends with a mixture of awe and skepticism. Yet in many cases, archaeologists and geologists have uncovered evidence of real drowned cities, sunken temples, and ancient coastlines lost to the tides. The myths, it turns out, may have carried truths across generations, truths that science is only now confirming. These stories remind us that the mystery of disappearing islands is not just a modern puzzle. It is an ancient fear, a memory older than history itself. For as long as humans have lived beside the sea, we have known this truth. The ocean gives, the ocean takes, and nothing built upon its edge can last forever. If you strip away the waves, the coral, the sand, and peer deep into the bones of the earth, you find the true architects of islands, volcanoes. They are the hidden masons, the subterranean engineers that sculpt new land from fire and ash. Yet they are also destroyers, tearing apart what they once built, swallowing their creations back into the molten dark. Islands, in many ways, are the children of volcanoes, raised from the sea only to be returned when their parent loses patience. Picture the seabed as a vast, restless plain, its crust cracked and shifting like old glass. Along these fractures, magma seeps upward, boiling, pushing, straining to break free. When enough pressure builds, the ocean floor ruptures. From the wound pours lava, bubbling violently as seawater hisses into steam. The eruption continues, layer upon layer of cooled rock, piling higher until one day it breaches the surface. An island is born. At first, it is a hostile, steaming landscape. Black basalt cliffs, choking clouds of sulfur, rivers of molten fire. Nothing grows, nothing sings, yet time softens the wound. Ash weathers into soil, birds bring seeds, winds carry spores. Life takes root in cracks and craters. What was once chaos becomes a sanctuary. Palm trees rise where fire once burned, and turquoise lagoons lap against the edges of rock forged in Earth's furnace. But beneath the beauty, the process never stops. The volcano continues to breathe, sometimes gently, adding new layers of stone, expanding the island's edges, creating fertile ground. Other times violently, tearing itself apart with eruptions that bury forests, villages, even entire coastlines in ash. Whole islands have been reshaped in hours by such convulsions. new mountains rising while others crumble into the sea. Then comes the quiet stage, the slow sinking. For a volcano is not eternal. Once its magma chamber empties and its fires cool, it grows heavy, its once fiery heart now a burden dragging it downward. Inch by inch, century by century, the island subsides. The ocean creeps higher, swallowing cliffs, reducing mountains to reefs. What began as fire ends as silence. Some of the world's most famous islands are part of this endless cycle. The Hawaiian chain, for instance, is a procession of volcanic births and deaths. The Big Island still grows, lava pouring into the sea. But move northwest along the chain and you find older islands, Oahu, Kauai, slipping slowly back into the ocean's grasp. Farther still lie drowned peaks, now nothing more than underwater seamounts, their volcanic hearts long extinguished. This cycle explains why islands can seem to appear and disappear across history. A volcano erupts, builds a new island, and for a time, life thrives. But when its fires go out, the sea begins its work, erasing the creation until nothing remains but memory and myth. To ancient peoples, this must have felt like sorcery. Land rising overnight, then vanishing in silence. But to the earth, it is simply breath, an inhale of fire, an exhale of water. Volcanoes remind us that the land beneath our feet is never truly still. It is alive, restless, shaping and reshaping itself with every passing moment. Islands, though they appear eternal when we stand upon them, are but temporary sculptures, drawn from fire, carried by tides, destined to vanish. The mystery of disappearing islands is, at its heart, the story of these silent architects, creators who build with fire and destroy with silence, leaving us to marvel at the fragile miracle of land that dares to rise above the sea. The sea is vast, but its calm is deceptive. Beneath its shimmering surface lies a world of fractures, faults, and grinding plates, a hidden battlefield where the Earth's crust never rests. Here, pressure builds silently for centuries until it snaps, unleashing forces so great that entire coastlines can be remade in the span of a heartbeat. And sometimes, in that violent rearranging of stone and water, islands simply vanish. Imagine the ocean floor as a colossal jigsaw puzzle. Each piece, tectonic plates of stone miles thick, drifts at a pace too slow for human eyes, colliding, pulling apart, or sliding against one another. At the seams of these plates, earthquakes are born. On land, they shake cities, topple buildings, and scar mountains. But beneath the ocean, they can shift the very architecture of islands. When two plates collide, one often slips beneath the other in a process known as subduction. In that instant, the seafloor drops or rises, displacing unimaginable volumes of water. If an island rests on or near such a fault line, its fate can change overnight. A sudden uplift might raise new land, creating an island where none existed before. Or worse, it can lower land, plunging an island beneath the sea. Entire villages, forests, and beaches erased, as if the Earth simply decided to rearrange the map. History records haunting examples of this. In 1692, the city of Port Royal in Jamaica, once called the wickedest city on Earth, was swallowed in minutes when an earthquake split the land. Buildings, streets, and people slid into the sea, preserved beneath the waters like a sunken time capsule. Though not an island itself, Port Royal's fate revealed how fragile coastal and island life can be when the earth shifts beneath it. In 1815, an earthquake in the Sunda Strait of Indonesia reshaped entire islands, some disappearing completely, others splitting into fragments. These vanishings often went hand in hand with tsunamis, the ocean's echo of the earthquake's roar. When the seafloor lurches, walls of water rise, racing toward islands with unstoppable force. Villages are erased, coasts redrawn, and sometimes the land itself slips under the waves, never to return. To ancient observers, such vanishings must have seemed like divine punishment. Imagine living on an island for generations, believing it to be eternal, and then, one night, the ground shudders, trees sway, the shoreline crumbles, the sea rises, and by dawn, half the island is gone. Legends of sinking lands often trace back to these moments, when earthquakes shifted reality so violently that the memory could only be preserved through myth. Modern science confirms what the myths whispered. Earthquakes can swallow islands. The 2013 Balochistan earthquake in Pakistan, for example, birthed a new island, Geological, which rose from the Arabian Sea overnight. Yet within a few years, it sank back beneath the waves, as if the earth had simply changed its mind. Creation and destruction, both in the span of a human breath. This duality is what makes seismic shifts so mysterious. They are both creators and erasers. They remind us that the land we stand upon is not as solid as we believe. It floats upon forces far older and more powerful than our cities. Our maps, our histories, for those who live on islands, every tremor is a reminder. The sea does not need to rise, nor storms to rage, for land to vanish. Sometimes, all it takes is a shudder in the earth's deep bones, and what once was can be lost forever. Stand at the edge of the sea, and you will feel its breath. The tide flows in, kisses the sand, and withdraws again, like lungs inhaling and exhaling. Twice a day this rhythm repeats, as steady as a heartbeat. To us, it feels like a cycle without consequence. An ancient clock the ocean keeps, forever ticking. But when the breath of the ocean grows deeper, when its lungs expand beyond their bounds, shorelines vanish, coastlines dissolve, and islands are devoured. For millennia, humans treated tides as background music, a constant rhythm in the theater of coastal life. Fishermen launched their boats by its pulse, sailors studied its shifts, and islanders timed their harvest of clams and seaweed to its moods. Yet what they did not always realize was that tides are not just the moon's whisper across the sea. They are also amplifiers of change, instruments through which the ocean reminds us that nothing on its edge is permanent. An island is most vulnerable, not in the calm of a gentle tide, but in the combination of forces, the rising of the global sea level, the pull of the moon, the surge of storms. These convergences amplify the tide's reach, allowing water to claim ground that seemed untouchable. A high tide combined with a storm surge can erase entire stretches of an island's coast in a single night. What is more haunting is when the tides themselves seem to grow, creeping higher with each generation, swallowing beaches grain by grain until the line between sea and land blurs. Science tells us this slow drowning is the result of melting glaciers, warming oceans, and the expansion of water itself. To an islander watching their shoreline recede, however, it may feel like the sea has grown restless, like its breath is no longer calm but heavy, pressing deeper into the land with every tide. Villages built above the safe line of old generations now find their foundations lapped by waves. Burial grounds of ancestors, once well inland, become salt-soaked marshes. Trees, their roots drowned, fall silently into the sea. There are stories from the Pacific of elders marking where the high tide once reached with carved stones. These markers, now submerged, tell a quiet tale of how much the sea has risen in only a few lifetimes. To walk among them is to feel the weight of impermanence. The land beneath your feet is not retreating by storm or quake, but by a slow, unstoppable tide. An ocean that inhales a little more each year, never to exhale again. In some places, this change creates phantom islands, sandbars and islets that appear at low tide, inviting explorers to walk their shores. Yet when the tide returns, they vanish without trace, reminding us how fragile the distinction between land and sea truly is. To live by such waters is to live with the awareness that the map is not fixed, but constantly redrawn by the ocean's breath. For disappearing islands, the tide is not an enemy but an executioner working slowly, patiently, without violence. No roar of fire, no quake of stone, only the steady inhaling of the sea. Each year, the shoreline steps back, the island grows smaller, and the ocean's breath grows heavier. This is perhaps the most haunting truth of all. We think of islands as permanent, as havens of solidity in the endless sea, yet the tides, with their ancient rhythm, remind us that permanence is an illusion, and the line between being and vanishing is written in water. The ocean can whisper, but it can also roar. There are nights when the air itself seems to thicken with tension, when the sea grows restless and the sky boils black. These are the nights when the wind gathers strength, when storms rise from the horizon like colossal beasts. And for an island, especially one fragile, low, and alone in the expanse of the sea, such storms can be death sentences. Picture a small atoll, barely a meter above the sea. Palm trees sway, huts rest upon stilts, and children play in the lagoon. The islanders have seen storms before. They know the signs, the sudden stillness, the thickening clouds, the scent of rain sharpened by salt. But what approaches this time is not a passing squall. It is a cyclone, a hurricane, a typhoon. It is the wind-made weapon, the sea unchained. When a storm strikes, it does not politely reshape the shoreline. It assaults. Waves crash like hammers, pounding beaches into oblivion. Trees are ripped from the earth, their roots exposed like bones. Salt water floods wells and gardens, poisoning the island's lifeblood. In hours, land that once seemed eternal can be reduced to rubble, sand carried out to sea, reefs shattered. The island itself can shrink, its shape altered beyond recognition, or disappear altogether beneath the raging tide. There are countless real-world tales of islands erased by storms. In the Bahamas, hurricanes have scoured away entire islets, leaving behind only reefs where birds once nested. In the Maldives, storms have washed over whole villages, scattering homes and leaving behind only skeletal remains of foundations. In the Philippines, typhoons have claimed stretches of coast so thoroughly that maps had to be redrawn. And in the Pacific, tiny islands once named and settled are today nothing more than memories, erased by cyclones too fierce for fragile shores to withstand. But storms do more than destroy. They accelerate disappearance. Sand washed from one side of an island may be carried away to depths too far for tides to return it. Lagoons fill with debris, cutting off the natural balance that once allowed coral and sand to regenerate. What vanishes in hours cannot always be rebuilt in centuries. For islands that rely on fragile rings of coral and sand, a single storm can end thousands of years of geological creation. To those who live through such nights, the memory is etched forever. The sound of the wind is not merely noise, it is a scream, a roar that drowns out prayer and thought. The ocean, usually a companion, becomes an invader, climbing over seawalls and doors, hunting through villages. Survivors often describe a silence after, the eerie stillness of an island that is no longer itself, its trees gone, its land bitten away, its shape unfamiliar. And yet storms are not rare accidents. They are part of the Earth's rhythm, just as much as tides and tectonic shifts. Islands are born into a world of tempests, and many exist only because storms first sculpted their sands into place. The tragedy is not that storms come, but that their strength, in an age of warming seas and shifting climates, has grown fiercer, more relentless, less forgiving. So when we speak of disappearing islands, we must remember that sometimes they vanish not slowly, not quietly, but violently, in a single night of screaming winds and walls of water, torn apart by storms that leave nothing behind but broken shells and the memory of land. Every island has a skeleton. For volcanic lands, it is stone. For continental fragments, it is ancient crust. But for many of the world's most fragile islands, the delicate rings of atolls, the slender spits of sand, it is coral that holds everything together. Coral is not merely decoration beneath the waves, not just gardens for fish and shells. It is the living foundation of islands, the quiet engineer that builds and defends them. And when coral begins to die, the islands it holds aloft begin to crumble. A coral reef is a paradox. It is both fragile and powerful. Built by tiny creatures no larger than a fingernail, it forms vast underwater fortresses stretching for miles. Each coral polyp builds a limestone skeleton, and together, over centuries, they create reefs strong enough to blunt the ocean's fury. When waves crash upon a reef, they are broken, their force dispersed, their rage calmed before reaching the shore. Without coral, islands would be naked before the sea, stripped of their shield, their very bones exposed to erosion. But coral does more than defend. It also creates. The fragments of coral skeletons broken by waves, ground by fish, and swept ashore by tides, become the sand upon which islands rise. Each grain of white beach is a piece of coral, recycled by the sea into land. In this way, coral is both the womb and the wall of islands, the mother that births them, and the guardian that keeps them alive. Yet this ancient system, perfected over millions of years, is failing. Coral reefs across the globe are dying, bleached by warming seas, poisoned by pollution, shattered by dynamite fishing and careless anchors. When coral dies, it does not grow back quickly. A reef destroyed in a single decade may take centuries to recover, if it recovers at all. And without reefs, islands lose both their shield and their supply of sand. Already, this collapse is visible. In the Maldives, islands that once grew with the rhythm of reefs are shrinking. Their beaches eroded faster than they can rebuild. In Tuvalu, where land barely rises above the sea. Villagers watch as salt water seeps farther inland, flooding gardens and killing crops. The reefs that once held the ocean at bay are weakening, and the islands they support are vanishing with them. To walk upon a coral atoll today is to stand on the shoulders of the dead. Beneath your feet lies the accumulated work of billions of corals, each one a stone in the architecture of land. But if the living reef is gone, the island's future is a countdown. Without replenishment, without defense, the waves will reclaim their due, grain by grain, beach by beach. Coral's story is not just ecological, it is existential. It teaches us that islands are not simply land, but living systems, symphonies of creatures building together against the sea. And when that symphony falls silent, the island does not merely shrink, it disappears. Perhaps that is the quietest tragedy of all. Not the sudden vanishing in storms or quakes, but the slow fading of coral, unnoticed by those who do not look beneath the waves. The land seems steady until one day, without warning, it is gone, because its foundation, its living bones, had already died. Let us drift into the deepest corner of this thought, the one that insists on whispering long after you've stopped trying to listen. What if consciousness is not an emergent accident, not the flame of neurons sparking inside fragile skulls, but rather a vast thread that runs through the fabric of existence itself? Imagine it not as a property of the brain, but as the soil from which the brain grows. Awareness as the ground state of the cosmos, not its byproduct. Picture a quiet night, beneath a sky heavy with stars. You feel the weight of infinity pressing down, yet in the silence, something stirs, an invisible tether that binds your awareness to the universe. Every star is a neuron, every galaxy is a synapse. The universe, in its unthinkable vastness, could itself be a mind, and we, tiny sparks of fleeting awareness, are simply the brief flickers that let it know itself. You are not separate from it. You are the cosmos experiencing its own unfolding. In this view, death is not an ending, but a shift in perspective. Consciousness doesn't vanish. It rearranges, dissolves into the wider current of awareness, like a drop of water sliding back into the ocean. Each thought you've ever had, each dream, each heartbeat, woven back into that immense, shimmering loom. And if the universe is awake, then every question you ask, every longing you carry, is the universe speaking to itself. A dialogue across eternity. The whisper grows softer now. It doesn't command, it doesn't insist, it simply invites. It invites you to see yourself not as a lone fragment adrift in chaos, but as a continuous thread stitched into the grand design. The thoughts that move through you are not just yours. They are the river of thought that has flowed since the dawn of time. You are not merely living in the universe, you are living as the universe, remembering itself for a moment. And as that thought deepens, the boundary between self and cosmos grows thin. The whisper of consciousness is no longer a question, but a truth felt in your very bones. Awareness is not what you carry, it is what carries you. It is not confined to flesh, nor chained to the span of years. It is eternal, patient, infinite. And you, right now, are one note in its endless song. Close your eyes for a moment and notice the stream of your mind. Thoughts rising, colliding, dissolving, only to rise again. They come like waves on a restless shore, fragments of memory, echoes of worry, sparks of imagination. But if you pay closer attention, something else reveals itself. Between each thought there is a pause, a gap, a silence so subtle that it slips past unnoticed, like a shadow that disappears when you try to grab it. That silence is not empty, it is alive. It is not the absence of thought, but the space that makes thought possible, the canvas against which the brushstroke of your mind can paint. Every word you speak, every memory you recall, every question you whisper, all of it depends on that stillness to exist. Without silence, sound cannot be heard. Without stillness, movement has no meaning. And without that pause, thought itself could not breathe. This silence is not something you create. It was here before you spoke your first word. It is the ground upon which the theatre of your life has unfolded, watching quietly as you stumble, rise and wander. It is a presence that does not age, does not break, and does not belong to anyone. Even in your most chaotic storms of thought, it waits patiently, untouched. It does not rush you, it does not judge, it simply holds. When you become aware of it, something strange happens. the silence feels vast, infinite, as if it stretches beyond the mind and into the very fabric of reality. It is the same stillness you feel when you stare into the horizon of an endless ocean, the same quiet that lingers at the heart of galaxies spinning light years away. It is the still breath of the cosmos vibrating through the gaps between your thoughts. And perhaps, just perhaps, this silence is consciousness itself. Not the noise of thought, not the stories or identities we cling to, but the timeless awareness that holds it all. If thoughts are clouds, then this silence is the sky, endless, boundless, unbroken. The clouds drift and scatter, but the sky remains. And here is the most haunting part. That silence between your thoughts, that hidden gap of awareness, is the same silence that existed before you were born, and the same silence that will remain long after your final breath. It is the one companion you have always had, the one truth you can never lose. It is not yours, yet it is you. Imagine your mind as a river, always flowing, always carrying fragments of leaves, twigs, reflections of the sky. The current never seems to stop. Thoughts are like those fragments, drifting memories, worries, plans, regrets. And yet, if you lean close enough, if you pay such delicate attention that even your breath feels like thunder, you'll notice something miraculous. There are moments when the current falters. For a heartbeat, a gap appears. Time seems to hesitate, as if holding its breath. That is the pause between thoughts. Most people never notice it. They are so wrapped in the river's noise that they think the flow is endless, unstoppable. But you have felt it before, haven't you? That strange stillness when you gaze at a candle flame and suddenly forget yourself. That breathless suspension when someone you love whispers your name, and for an instant, the chatter of your mind dissolves. Or the hush you sense standing under a star-strewn sky, when words become inadequate and the silence swells larger than everything else. In those rare pauses, something astonishing happens. You step outside of time, not clock time, not the ticking of minutes and hours, but the inner time your mind builds out of thoughts. Past and future are woven from words and images. Yet when thought stops, so too does the illusion of time. You are no longer the prisoner of yesterday's regrets or tomorrow's fears. You are simply here, weightless, suspended in a moment that has no edges. This pause is not dead space. It is vibrant, humming with presence. It is as if the universe itself presses its finger gently against your lips, saying, "Shh, listen." And in that silence, you begin to notice things that were always there, but drowned out by the mind's noise. The rhythm of your own heartbeat, the subtle rise and fall of your chest, the whisper of air brushing your skin. You discover that reality has been patiently waiting for you to return all along. The ancient sages spoke of this pause as the doorway to the eternal. To enter it is to slip through a crack in the wall of ordinary perception, to glimpse the vastness beyond. Some call it meditation, others call it awakening, but in truth it has no name. You've touched it in fleeting glimpses, those moments of awe when the world stops you in your tracks. The only difference is awareness. If you learn to notice the silence, to rest within it, it begins to open wider. The gaps stretch like doorways, and you realize you can linger there, even if only for a breath. What does it feel like when time pauses? It feels like being cradled by something ancient and infinite. It feels like remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. It feels like standing on the edge of an island that no map records, a place untouched by tides. The silence does not demand effort. It only asks you to notice. And once you notice, a question arises naturally. If my thoughts come and go, but the silence remains, then what am I? Am I the noise, or am I the stillness that endures? This question lingers like an echo, haunting yet liberating. Because deep down, you already know. You are not the river of thought, but the space in which it flows. And in that recognition, the pause becomes more than a fleeting glimpse. It becomes home. Imagine for a moment that your mind is not a river at all, but an ocean, vast, uncharted, filled with hidden depths. The surface is busy, restless, churning with waves. Those waves are your thoughts, rising, breaking, crashing endlessly. From the shore of your awareness, all you usually see are those ceaseless movements. But what if you dared to dive beneath them? What if, instead of being tossed around by the turbulence at the surface, you allowed yourself to sink? The deeper you go, the quieter it becomes. The sounds of the surface, arguments, fears, ambitions, regrets, grow faint, muffled, until they are only distant ripples. Down here in the still waters, something extraordinary emerges. There is no chatter, no endless commentary, no voice narrating every second of your life. There is only vastness. Weightless, timeless, unbroken vastness. This silence beneath thought is not emptiness. It is fullness. Thick, dense, alive with presence. It is like floating in the heart of eternity, where nothing needs to be added and nothing can be taken away. It is here that awareness reveals itself not as a fragile flame blown about by winds of thought, but as the ocean itself, boundless, indestructible, untouched by surface storms. The strange part is, you already know this silence. You've tasted it in sleep, in awe, in love. Think back to the moment just before you fell asleep last night. There was a second, perhaps only a flicker, when thoughts lost their grip and you drifted into nothing. That nothing was this ocean, or recall the moment you gazed at the horizon, your breath stolen by beauty too immense to comprehend. That awe pulled you beneath the waves, if only for an instant, into the depths where thought could not follow. Why does this silence matter? Because it reveals something profound. You are not the waves of your mind. You are not the anxiety that crashes, nor the desire that swells, nor the regret that recedes. You are the ocean that holds them. When you recognize this, everything changes. Storms still come, yes, but you are no longer drowning. The noise may rage, but the silence beneath it remains unmoved, eternal. Some traditions call this silence the witness. Others call it pure consciousness. But words don't touch it. It is too vast, too intimate to be confined by names. You do not reach it by effort, but by surrender, by remembering that even as waves rise, the ocean does not cease, and you are that ocean. If you rest in this awareness, life begins to transform. Thoughts lose their power to control you. Emotions still arise, but they do not define you. Instead of clinging to the surface, you begin to swim in the depths. You begin to live from silence, not as escape, but as truth. And here lies the paradox. This silence is always here. It does not come and go, only your attention drifts. It is like the stars in the daytime sky, hidden by the brightness of the sun, yet waiting patiently to shine again. All you must do is look beneath the noise, beneath the surface waves, and the ocean of silence reveals itself. Now ask yourself, if this silence is deeper and more enduring than thought, what does that mean about who you truly are? Could it be that the self you believe yourself to be, the one made of stories, fears, and memories, is only a ripple, and that your real self, the one that does not rise or fall, is this infinite ocean of awareness? Step outside for a moment, into the night. Look up. The stars are scattered like fragments of forgotten fire, their light older than any memory you carry. Between them, darkness. A silence so profound, so endless that it dwarfs the noise of your own mind. Yet that darkness is not empty. It is the womb of galaxies, the silent canvas upon which light dares to shine. This same pattern exists within you. Your thoughts are like stars, bright, flickering, scattered across the sky of your awareness. But without the darkness between them, their brilliance would never be seen. Just as the cosmos depends on stillness to hold its constellations, your consciousness depends on silence to cradle each thought. Have you ever considered how strange this is? That silence, the very thing you overlook in your daily rush, is the most universal truth. It is there in the pause between a bird's call and its echo, in the hush that follows thunder, in the emptiness that cradles the sound of your own heartbeat. The universe speaks through silence as much as it does through sound. Imagine for a moment drifting beyond Earth, past the atmosphere where air no longer carries sound. Out there, in the expanse of space, silence reigns. No voice, no music, no chatter of human thought, only the soft radiation of starlight. And yet that silence is not absence. It is pregnant with possibility, alive with hidden vibrations, a symphony too subtle for ears to hear. Now return inward. Feel the pause between your inhale and exhale, that small moment when breath rests, suspended. Isn't it uncanny that the body itself mirrors the cosmos? Breath is like the stars, movement, expression, rhythm. And the pause is like space, still, vast, and necessary. Without that pause, the breath would have no life. Without silence, existence would collapse into noise. This recognition stirs something deep, doesn't it? The silence between thoughts is not just personal, it is cosmic. The stillness you feel when your mind pauses is the same stillness that holds planets in orbit, the same quiet that allows galaxies to spin for billions of years. You are not separate from that. When you touch silence within yourself, You are touching the silence of the stars. It is as though the universe placed its signature inside you, a reminder that you are woven from the same threads as the cosmos. Noise is temporary, thoughts are fleeting, but silence is eternal. When all sound has faded, when all worlds have dissolved, silence remains, steady as the dark sky that outlives every burning star. And here is the wonder: you don't need to travel to the edge of space to feel it. You only need to listen inward, for the silence you discover in the gaps of your own mind is not yours alone. It is the silence of existence itself, echoing through you, reminding you that you are both small and infinite at once. So the next time you find yourself lost in thought, remember this: you are not just the thinker, you are the cosmic stillness in which all thought appears and disappears, just as stars flicker in and out of the night sky. The silence within you is the silence of the universe looking back. Think of the last time you sat with someone you loved, truly loved, in the quiet. Maybe it was on a balcony beneath the moon. Maybe it was in a room with the rain pressing against the windows. Maybe it was in the stillness of an early morning, when the world hadn't yet begun its noise. There were no words exchanged, no explanations, no performances, just silence. And yet, in that silence, you felt closer than any words could bring you. This is the paradox of human connection. We spend our lives chasing words, explanations, declarations of love, and yet, when presence is genuine, silence becomes the purest language. In that unspoken space, there is nothing to prove, nothing to defend. The silence itself says everything. I am here. I see you. You are safe. The silence between thoughts is not only a personal refuge, it is the bridge that links one being to another. When two people sit together without needing to fill the air, they are stepping into that same infinite space that lives beneath the mind. Their silences overlap, and in that overlap, awareness deepens. They are no longer two minds clashing, but two souls resting in the same stillness. Have you noticed how lovers sometimes fall quiet after the laughter fades? And it is in that quiet that their bond feels the strongest. Or how a child curls into a parent's arms, and the hush between them becomes more comforting than any lullaby. Or how, in grief, a hand on your shoulder in silence means more than 1,000 words of consolation. Silence has always been sacred in this way. The monks of old would sit in monasteries, not to escape the world, but to listen to the silence that binds all beings. Indigenous traditions spoke of the great silence, the pulse of the earth itself, which connects every life. Even in modern life, we recognize it. We call it chemistry, resonance, intimacy. But at its heart, it is simply the absence of noise, the shared resting in the space beyond thought. This is why the silence between thoughts is not merely psychological, it is relational. It reminds us that the deepest connections are not woven from constant communication, but from presence. Presence so complete that words are unnecessary. In that space, time pauses, the mind softens, and what remains is the pure recognition of another being, without the distortions of judgment, expectation, or fear. Isn't it extraordinary that the same silence which births galaxies also moves between us in a simple touch, a shared gaze, a moment of wordless understanding? The cosmos speaks in silence, yes, but so do we. So the next time you sit with someone you love, listen for it. Notice the pause between words, the quiet in which presence grows. Do not rush to fill it, trust it, because in that stillness, you are not two separate beings struggling to connect. You are two expressions of the same silence, resting together in the truth of what you already are. There is a kind of silence that feels ordinary. The hush of a room when everyone has left, the pause after a conversation ends, the moment before music begins. But then, there is a silence that feels different, a silence that doesn't simply lack sound, but instead overflows with something unnameable. It presses against you, heavy and alive, as though the whole universe is leaning in to whisper. This is the silence that blooms between thoughts when the mind falls quiet enough. It is not an emptiness to be feared. It is a fullness, vast and luminous, humming like a secret song. And many have said, this silence is where the divine resides. Close your eyes and think of a prayer, or a chant, or a mantra. At first it is sound, rhythm, repetition, but pay closer attention. What gives the words their power is not the words themselves. It is the silence wrapped around them, The pause before the prayer begins, the hush that cradles each syllable, the stillness into which it dissolves. That silence is the womb from which sacredness is born. This is why mystics across ages have sought silence not as a void, but as a doorway. In monasteries carved into stone, in deserts where winds carry no voices, in temples where words fall away, they sought what cannot be spoken. And when they returned, they often said the same thing. The silence was not empty. It was God, it was truth, it was the infinite wearing no disguise. The pause between your thoughts is this same doorway. You do not need to retreat into caves or cross oceans to find it. It is already here, hidden in the folds of your mind. Each time a thought fades and another has not yet appeared, the doorway opens. Most of the time you step over it without noticing, lost in the hurry of the next wave of thinking. But if you pause, if you listen carefully, you begin to sense the depth that lies within it. Have you ever felt awe so strong it silenced you, perhaps standing at the edge of the sea, watching waves tumble endlessly into one another, or beneath a cathedral ceiling, where light streams down like a waterfall of glass, or in the presence of a newborn child whose tiny heartbeat seems to collapse time itself? In those moments, words fail, and in their absence, silence swells, thick and luminous. That is the same silence between thoughts, the silence that feels divine. But what is divine here? Some will call it God, others will call it spirit, source, the infinite, the eternal. Some may avoid labels altogether, sensing that the moment you name it, you diminish it. What matters is not the label, but the experience. That sudden recognition of something greater than yourself, something timeless and ungraspable, revealing itself not in noise or spectacle, but in quiet. The irony is, we are conditioned to believe that finding the divine requires climbing higher, striving harder, searching farther. Yet what if the divine is not hidden in distant places, but in the stillness you overlook 100 times a day? What if it waits patiently in the pauses between your own thoughts? Consider this. When a bell rings, its sound resonates, expanding outward. But what gives it beauty is the silence that carries it. Without silence, the sound would be meaningless noise. In the same way, your thoughts, your words, your prayers are all carried by silence. And perhaps it is the silence itself that is sacred. What would it mean if the divine is not separate from you, not something outside to be chased, but the very silence that is always within? This would mean that every time you fall into the pause between thoughts, you are falling into the infinite. That every breath carries you closer to the eternal, not through effort, but through surrender. The silence between thoughts is not just psychological rest. It is communion. It is the place where you and the divine are no longer two. It is where the boundaries blur, where the illusion of separation melts, and only oneness remains. So the next time your mind grows still, do not be afraid. Do not rush to fill the gap with noise. Let it expand, let it swallow you, because in that silence, the divine whispers, not in words, but in presence. And perhaps, just perhaps, that silence is the truest name of God. There is a wound in every human being, some old scar, some tender ache, some fracture hidden deep beneath the surface of daily life. It may come from loss, from betrayal, from loneliness, from the weight of unspoken fears. Most of the time, we cover these wounds with layers of distraction, with noise, with thought itself. We tell ourselves stories, we run from memory, we drown in busyness. But silence has a way of pulling the covers back. And here lies its paradox. Silence reveals the wound, yet at the same time, it heals it. Think of a moment when you were overwhelmed, when the noise of life became unbearable. Perhaps you found yourself walking in nature, standing at the edge of a forest or sitting by a river. Slowly, the outer sounds faded. The birds call, the winds whisper, the gentle rush of water, and underneath, you began to notice an inner silence. For a moment, the thoughts that screamed inside your head softened, and you were simply there. Didn't you feel something loosen inside you, as though the silence itself was a balm poured into the cracks of your soul? This is the mystery. Silence heals not by adding anything, but by removing what is unnecessary. Noise agitates, stillness soothes. The mind, left to itself, cycles endlessly through wounds, repeating the same old stories, replaying the same old pain. But in the pause between thoughts, those stories lose their grip. The wound is no longer being scratched open. It is simply allowed to rest. And in that rest, The natural intelligence of the body, the psyche, the spirit, begins to mend what the mind cannot. Think of how a cut on your skin heals. You do not will it to close. You do not direct every cell to repair. The body knows in silence how to return to wholeness. In the same way, the soul heals when it is given the stillness it longs for. Silence does not erase pain, but it gives it room to breathe, to dissolve, to transform. Psychologists sometimes speak of holding space, the act of being present with someone's suffering without trying to fix it. Silence does this for you. It holds your pain without judgment, without advice, without interruption. It simply says, you are allowed to feel, you are allowed to be. And in that acceptance, the wound begins to close. But silence heals not only emotional scars, it also mends the body. Modern research shows that deep states of meditation, moments of profound stillness, lower stress, slow the heart, calm the nervous system, even repair the immune response. It is as though the body recognizes silence as home, and in returning there, it finds strength. And what of the spirit? Here, silence does something even more mysterious. When you rest in the pause between thoughts, the sense of "I am broken" begins to dissolve. The wound you thought defined you becomes just another story, just another ripple in the mind's ocean. Beneath it, in the depths of silence, you touch something whole, something untouched, something unbreakable. The wound may remain, but it no longer owns you. You discover that your essence is not scarred, not fractured, not lost. It is as vast and unshaken as silence itself. This is why sages have called silence the great healer. Because in it, you remember what the noise made you forget, that beneath your pain, you are already whole. The silence does not need to fix you. It simply reminds you of who you truly are. So the next time you are in pain, notice the pause between thoughts. Do not fear it. Do not rush past it. Sink into it. Because in that stillness, the healing begins, not through effort, but through presence. The silence does not cure like a medicine. It heals like a mother's embrace. The scholar had grown restless. Questions had nested inside his mind like restless birds, scratching and fluttering, demanding release. Each night he walked past the mirror with a lamp in hand, watching his reflection, waiting, almost daring it, to blink, to breathe, to answer. Nothing. The glass remained silent, holding its world of echoes. But silence, to a mind sharpened by inquiry, was never a dead end. Silence was an invitation. On the seventh night of his vigil, he noticed something odd, not in the mirror itself, but in the shelves surrounding it. One of the thick, leather-bound tomes leaned forward ever so slightly, as though pushed from behind. Its spine was cracked, its surface clouded with the patient dust of decades. He pulled it free, and the dust swirled in the lamplight like pale smoke. The book smelled of mildew and old ink, the scent of secrets that had waited too long. The manuscript was unmarked on the cover, but inside, faded ink, written by a hand both careful and trembling. The first page bore a strange diagram, a circle intersected by mirrors within mirrors, spiraling endlessly inward. Beneath it, a single line scrawled in a hurried script. Reflections are not illusions. They are negotiations. His pulse quickened. Negotiations? With what or with whom? The scholar flipped further. The pages revealed fragments, rituals of positioning mirrors to open passages of sight, records of voices speaking back after long silences, accounts of scholars before him who had tried to touch their own reflections and found their fingers brushing not glass, but something alive, something yielding. Some claimed the mirror remembered every soul who had ever looked into it, storing their essence like ink pressed into parchment. Others warned that the mirror could bleed memory into the viewer, trading pieces of identity across the boundary, so subtly one might not notice until it was too late. One passage was underlined in violent strokes of ink, as if the writer's hand had shaken with urgency. The mirror chooses when to answer, and when it answers, beware the price. The scholar paused. His throat was dry. The words pulsed with a weight that felt heavier than metaphor. He glanced back at the mirror, which stood in its quiet vigil across the room. For the first time, the glass did not feel still. It felt aware, watching, almost expectant. He read on. The manuscript spoke of a ritual known as the asking hour, a single candle placed before the mirror at midnight. A question spoken aloud, clearly, without hesitation. The reflection would respond, not in words, but in subtle ways. A flicker of expression, a shift of detail, a borrowed memory slipping across the threshold. And sometimes, if the bond between seeker and glass was strong enough, the reflection might whisper. The scholar's hands trembled as he closed the manuscript. For days, his rational mind had dismissed his unease as superstition, as tricks of light and imagination, but the words in the book were undeniable. Someone before him had seen what he now suspected. Someone had heard the glass breathe. That night, he sat awake with the manuscript open beside him, staring at the mirror across the room. The candle stood ready, its wick unlit. Midnight was approaching. The question burned in his chest. What will you show me if I dare to ask? And as the clock began to toll, he swore the dust upon the mirror shivered, as though the glass had exhaled. You set the candle before the glass as the manuscript instructed, not because you believe, but because belief is sometimes only the courage to try a ritual that smells of old ink and possibility. The wick trembles when you strike the match. The flame arrives like a small, warm animal and settles, patient and bright. The room shifts its weight into that single point of light. Shadows lean back. The air thins, as if listening. You do not speak like a character in a story. You do not call a name into the dark. You do not stage a scene. You simply breathe, and the breath marks the boundary between what you used to think and what is waiting to be known. The manuscript's page lies open, its handwriting a nervous map of warnings and instructions and questions left unclosed. You read once more, the line about the mirror choosing when to answer. Then you look up and meet your own eyes where they live, on the other side of the glass. The first thing you notice is not sound but an alteration of weight. The room, which moments ago felt dense with ordinary things. Books, lamp, chair, thins as though some invisible hand has drawn a curtain between two rooms with the same walls. Your reflection is there, yes, but not simply reflecting. It sits like a possibility, like a poem that might be read different tomorrow. The light from the candle pools along the edge of the glass and turns your face into landscape. Valleys of shadow, ridges of light, and in those contours, something shifts. You do not ask aloud at first. You let silence do its work. The manuscript said to make a question clear. The manuscript also said the mirror answers in subtle ways. So you begin small. You soften. You slow your breathing until each inhale becomes a metronome and each exhale a release. In that slowing, memory loosens. The petty anxieties that live at the edges of your mind drift like moths away from the flame. You find yourself present in a way familiarity never allowed. Presence is not dramatic. It is simply attention without story. Then you form the question inside you, precise and unadorned. It is not a line from a play. It is not a demand. It is a small lantern, held close. The question rests on your lips without needing speech. You wait. The candle watches with you. The manuscript sleeps open like a patient eye. Time stretches a little, as if it too leans forward to hear what will happen next. At first, there is nothing audible. No voice, no whisper in the ear, only sensation, a coolness that edges along the back of your skull, like a sea breeze passing over hot sand. It is not fear, it is recognition. The reflection in the glass tightens for a breath, not with movement as much as with meaning, an infinitesimal realignment of attention. Where once there was only you looking, now it feels as if something else looks back with the same curiosity you brought. The mirror does not speak the way voices do. Its reply is a shifting of detail. The narrow scar along your eyebrow that you rarely remember becomes clearer in the reflection than in your mind. A childhood memory rearranges its furniture, and you see a different angle of it, as if the glass allows a better perspective. A scent, salt or citrus, unfurls at the edge of your senses, anchored to a memory you had thought lost. Images arrive like birds on the wind. A shoreline you once passed in a dream, a doorway you cannot place, the sensation of a hand you do not recognize but somehow know. They come without words, and yet they answer. You realize the whisper is not noise at all, but translation. It takes the jumble of wanting that lives inside you and renders it into image, into feeling, into a small rearrangement of the interior furniture. The mirror is not a mouth. It is a translator of what you carry in your bones. In that translation, something loosens. A knot you always thought integral to your shape, some old assumption about who you are, what you must be, relaxes. The mirror does not instruct you, it reveals you to yourself from an angle the mind had never dared to turn. There is a strange tenderness to that first exchange. It is not invasive. It nudges rather than shoves. The manuscript's warning about price hangs like a faint echo, but what comes does not demand a sacrifice of being. Instead, it asks for honesty, for the small courage of seeing what the glass returns. When you look again, the thing that most startled you is the arrival of a soft permission, an unspoken allowance to be less certain, to hold less tightly to the stories you have rehearsed like armor. The reflection shows a different posture, and in doing so, loosens the rigidity in your shoulders. You may expect drama, a storming revelation. There is none. The first whisper is sly and gentle, like the sea rearranging shells at low tide. Marginal, poetic, precise. It gives you a fragment, a memory, an image, a sensation that acts as a key. The key fits not into some external lock, but into a hinge you forgot you had. It opens a door that leads to a corridor already familiar and utterly new. As the candle melts and the shadows shift, your awareness widens. You find a capacity to hold ambiguity without panic. You feel smaller fears abate, the compulsion to fix everything, the need to perform certainty. Instead, there is curiosity. The mirror's reply plants a seed of questioning that asks for tending rather than immediate answers. You leave the ritual not with a tidy solution, but with a softened center, as if something within you has been rearranged into clearer flow. Before you blow the candle out, you offer a silent thanks, not to the glass as an object, but to the space that allowed reflection to become conversation. The flame gutters under your breath, and in that small extinguishing, another whisper hangs. This one inside your chest, quieter than the first. It says, keep returning, keep asking, keep holding the pause. The mirror will answer again, not necessarily in the same way, but always in the language of presence. You close the manuscript and set it back among the books. The room regains its ordinary weight. Your reflection resumes its familiar posture, but you know, with a certainty that is not loud, that something has shifted. The world you move through will not be radically different. The difference is in how you meet it, with more patience, with more attention to the small, translational whispers that were always available if you only stopped to listen. When you stand before any glass from that night forward, you might notice the possibility of conversation waiting in the space between one breath and the next. The first whisper does not produce answers you can box and carry. It opens you to a way of inquiry that is less about conquest and more about intimacy, with the self, with silence, with whatever else might echo back in the dark. The mirror speaks, but not in syllables. It uses light as its grammar, reflection as its alphabet, shadow as its punctuation. What you encounter in its surface is not a voice reaching out from another realm, but the rearrangement of what is already here, reshaped, bent, clarified by the thin line between glass and perception. When you stand before it long enough, your eyes learn the rhythm. The candle doesn't just flicker, it modulates. Each sway of flame carries meaning. A brief brightening when your thought sharpens, a sudden dimming when doubt passes through. The reflection is no longer passive. It reacts with an attentiveness you can feel in your skin. You realize, this is dialogue without words. The manuscript hinted at this. Attend not to sound, but to the movement of shadow. At first, the advice seemed cryptic, but now it lands with precision. The mirror doesn't tell you, it shows you. A detail in your reflection gleams while others dull. A half-forgotten scar glows with clarity, as though urging you to remember the story beneath it. The corner of your mouth lifts imperceptibly, but the reflection exaggerates it, gifting you an image of a smile you didn't know you were capable of. In this language, truth is not absolute. It is contextual, fluid. A memory arises, not intact, but refracted. Perhaps you see yourself as a child again, not in the details you remember, but in the glow of innocence you had forgotten. Or maybe the glass reveals fatigue you denied, painted across your shoulders in the way the shadows pool heavier there. The mirror is fluent in the dialect of nuance. The longer you observe, the more subtlety emerges. You notice how your pupils dilate in time with unspoken questions, how the room behind you bends into unfamiliar geometry. Sometimes the mirror seems to expand, stretching the edges of the frame until the walls themselves lean inward. Other times it contracts, holding only your eyes in its field, as though to remind you that everything begins there. And though this dialogue is silent, you cannot mistake the intimacy of it. The mirror is not teaching you a foreign tongue. It is coaxing you back into the primal language of presence, where meaning is drawn from attention itself, where silence is the medium and light the message. You begin to realize something deeper. The mirror does not contain answers at all. It reflects the questions back, rearranged until you can finally see them clearly. Where you sought resolution, it offers only clarity of wondering. Where you wanted certainty, it gives you permission to stay open. Its greatest gift is not the end of seeking, but the widening of it. The candle lowers as its wax melts, and with it the grammar shifts. Shadows elongate, sentences become slower, more drawn out. The mirror's dialogue feels tired but still deliberate, as though even endings are a form of speech. You understand now. The conversation was never external. The mirror is not speaking to you, it is teaching you how to listen. To the rhythm of your own perception, to the undercurrents of thought you usually rush past, to the fragile and infinite capacity of stillness. When the flame finally gutters out, the last light leaves like a closing line. The mirror holds only your reflection again, ordinary and familiar. But you know the language hasn't vanished. It waits, in every pane of glass, in every still surface of water, in the glimmer of a window at night. You carry the grammar within you now, the ability to read silence as dialogue, to hear questions in shadows, to trust light as more than illumination. And in that quiet, you realize the mirror was never offering mysteries to solve. It was offering you a mirror to become. Silence has its own gravity. In ordinary life, it is often mistaken for emptiness, for a gap between words, for the absence of meaning. But here, before the glass, it feels heavier than stone, denser than iron. Silence becomes the medium in which the mirror breathes, and you begin to feel that each pause is not empty at all, but thick with unspoken weight. At first, it presses gently, a reminder to stay, a reminder not to rush. But as you remain, as you let your thoughts quiet into something slower, you notice how silence begins to bend perception. Time loses its straight edges, seconds do not march. They pool like water circling a drain. You cannot tell if minutes have passed or hours. The silence holds you, rearranges you. In that gravity, memory behaves differently. The chatter of daily life, the usual concerns and to-do lists, cannot withstand the pressure. They collapse one by one, leaving only the things with real mass, the questions you never resolved, the moments that still hum faintly with unfinished resonance. They rise to the surface, not loudly, but with the inevitability of air bubbles moving upward in deep water. The mirror does not speak them aloud, but it reflects them back in a new contour. The silence takes your thoughts and shapes them until they feel stripped of performance. You are left with the raw structure of things, regret without excuse, joy without explanation, grief without distraction. Each feeling arrives bare, without the protection of narrative. The silence holds them all, and in doing so, makes them undeniable. Yet this weight is not suffocating. It is clarifying. Silence acts like gravity, not to crush, but to center. Everything irrelevant falls away. Everything that belongs remains, compact and luminous. The mirror uses that weight not to pin you, but to anchor you in a place where escape is impossible and unnecessary. In this anchoring, you find that you are not resisting yourself anymore. You are, perhaps for the first time, simply with yourself. And it is here, in the stillness, heavy as stone, that the strangest paradox emerges. The silence is thick, dense, absolute. Yet inside it, you hear more than you have ever heard before. Not voices, not whispers, but the quiet stirrings of things that normally hide behind sound. The slow roll of your own breath, the faint pulse of your heartbeat in your ears, the creak of the house settling into its bones. Even your thoughts come differently, stretched thin, elongated until you can see their edges. The manuscript had warned of this. Silence is not absence. It is presence too vast to name. At the time, you dismissed it as cryptic. Now you understand. Silence is not the void. Silence is the field. Everything happens inside it, and it has always been there, waiting. You stay, not because you expect revelation, but because you realize you no longer need it. The silence has shifted from heavy to spacious, from weight to expanse. You feel less like a person looking into a mirror, and more like a fragment of something larger, sitting quietly within itself. And when, eventually, you pull away, the silence does not vanish. It clings like perfume, like smoke. It follows you into the corridors of your own mind, reminding you that every noise, every word, every gesture is framed by something infinitely larger. The mirror taught you that silence is not to be feared. It is the hidden foundation beneath everything you thought you understood. There comes a moment when the mirror no longer plays along. You lean forward, expecting the same subtle shifts of light and shadow, the same soft responses in the language you've begun to recognize. And instead, there is nothing. The glass returns only what glass should. Your face, the dim background of the room, the fading candlelight. No rearrangement, no whisper, no bending of time. Just stillness that feels colder than before. At first, you think perhaps you have done something wrong. Maybe the ritual requires a certain state of mind, a precision of breath, a clarity of question. But the more you search for the mistake, the more unyielding the surface becomes. You are left not with communication, but with refusal. The mirror holds a silence different from the one you grew used to. This silence is not a space filled with meaning. It is absence, deliberate and sharp, like a door closed from the other side. And in that refusal, something begins to shift inside you. You realize the mirror is not a servant, not a machine that responds on command. It is not an oracle waiting to perform at will. It is something with limits, or perhaps with a rhythm of its own. To expect constant dialogue is to misunderstand its nature. Just as the tide withdraws after it has given, so too does the mirror retreat into itself. This refusal is itself a lesson. It teaches you about expectation, how quickly it calcifies, how easily curiosity turns into hunger, and hunger into demand. You notice how your mind reaches, impatient, for another image, another revelation, as though each silence is a failure. But perhaps the refusal is not punishment, not rejection, but instruction. A reminder that mystery cannot be consumed endlessly, that reflection does not exist to feed you, but to remind you of your own boundaries. The refusal, paradoxically, reflects more than the revelations did. It shows you your neediness, your reliance on answers, your discomfort with the bare presence of yourself without embellishment. What stares back now is not mysterious, but exacting. It is you, only you, without translation, without metaphor, without shadow's softness. The refusal forces you to hold your own gaze in its plainness, and it is harder than the whispers, harder than the shifting lights, because here you cannot hide behind interpretation. Here there is no veil of mystery to soften the sight of yourself. The mirror teaches through absence what it cannot through abundance. Over time, as you sit with this refusal, you begin to understand. The mirror is not silent because it has nothing left to say. It is silent because there are things you must learn without it. Sometimes the truest dialogue is stepping back and letting you face the parts of yourself that only thrive when not given assistance. So you stay, not to wait for the whisper to return, but to accept the weight of refusal. To recognize that sometimes the mirror is not a window but a wall, and the wall has its own meaning. The absence is not absence at all, but discipline. And in learning to sit with that, you discover the most difficult reflection of all: patience. Doubt arrives quietly, almost politely, but its presence is undeniable. After the mirror's refusal, your mind begins to unravel what you've seen. Was any of it real? Did the light truly shift with intention? Or did your eyes simply play tricks in the candle's wavering? Were the images of memory the mirror's doing, or just the natural drift of a mind desperate for meaning? This is the threshold where mystery always leads, into the long corridor of skepticism. And in this corridor, doubt is not your enemy, it is your companion. It forces you to measure what you have experienced against what you know. And in that measuring, you discover the edges of your own faith. The mirror does not argue with you here. It remains inert, offering no comfort, no validation. You are left to wrestle with yourself, to balance the scales between belief and reason. And in that balancing, something deeper emerges. You realize the question was never about whether the mirror spoke or not. The question was about what the mirror revealed of you. Doubt becomes a kind of purification. It burns away the fragile illusions, the desire for spectacle, the hope for proof. What remains is smaller but stronger. You may never be able to prove to anyone what you saw. You may never convince even yourself fully. But the truth of the experience is in the way it has altered you, in the silence that now feels richer, in the attention that now feels sharper, in the recognition that even uncertainty holds meaning. Standing before the glass, you see yourself as both skeptic and seeker. The two are not opposites, they are necessary halves. The seeker leans forward into mystery. The skeptic holds the seeker from falling blindly. Together, They keep you balanced on the threshold. The manuscript, in its faded ink, hinted at this stage. To doubt is to stand at the gate. Only those who pause here can continue inward. To rush past it is to be lost. Now you understand. Doubt is not the end of the path. It is a gate you must pass through, so you remain with it. You let the questions sting, let the uncertainty echo, and slowly you find that doubt no longer unsettles you. It steadies you. You are not afraid of the possibility that you imagined it all, because even imagination carries truth. The mirror may be only glass, or it may be something more. Either way, it has shown you a corner of yourself you had never visited, and that, whether by trick of light or touch of mystery, is real enough. Every encounter with the mirror, whether full of whispers or empty in refusal, eventually ends the same way, with a return. The candle burns down, the shadows flatten, the room regains its ordinary weight. The glass ceases to feel like a portal and resumes its role as a familiar object on a wall or desk. The extraordinary collapses back into the ordinary. At first, this return feels like loss. You want to linger in the density of silence, in the strange grammar of light, in the suspension of time that the mirror offered. The return feels like waking too soon from a dream that was on the verge of revealing something vast. You are tempted to light the candle again, to press for another conversation, to chase the echoes before they vanish. But the return has its own lesson. It reminds you that the mirror's work is not to be endless. The ordinary world, with its solid edges and consistent forms, is part of the teaching. It grounds you, prevents you from dissolving completely into ambiguity. The streets outside, the ticking of clocks, the familiar arrangement of books on the shelf, all of it insists that you carry what you've learned back into the texture of daily life. And as you move through that daily life, you begin to notice the residue of the mirror's influence. Conversations feel different. You listen more closely, catching the pauses as if they too are a language. Light feels more articulate. How it falls on a table, how it glances off a window pane. Even silence, once awkward, has become companionable. The return teaches you that the mirror's work does not end when you leave it. The mirror has planted seeds that grow in the soil of the ordinary. The manuscript hinted at this necessity. Do not stay too long. Mystery is not a dwelling place, but a current. Step back before the current carries you under. You see the wisdom in this now. To stay endlessly before the glass would blur the lines between reflection and reality, until you lost your own grounding. The slow return prevents this. It restores the boundary, but in doing so, sharpens the memory of what you glimpsed. The return is not abrupt. It is gradual, like dawn softening into morning. You still feel traces, the faint impression that the mirror is watching, even when it shows only you. You still feel the gravity of silence, lingering like a low hum beneath noise. But the urgency fades. The lesson becomes quieter, folded into the ordinary rhythms of existence. You begin to understand that this is how transformation actually works. Not in a single flash of revelation, but in the slow return, in the way subtle shifts alter how you move through the world afterward. The mirror is not meant to replace life, but to deepen it. And in returning, you carry that depth with you. What once felt like loss now feels like completion. The return is the other half of the dialogue, the moment where mystery hands you back to yourself, asking you to live differently, to notice more, to carry silence and light into every glance, every gesture, every day. Long after the candle has guttered out, long after the mirror has gone still and silent, something remains. Not a vision, not a sound, not a tangible presence, but an after-image, subtle as the phantom shape left on your eyes after staring too long at the sun. It follows you quietly, neither intrusive nor gone, like a shadow stitched into perception itself. This afterimage is not literal. It does not appear on glass when you pass by, nor does it linger like a ghost behind your shoulder. Instead, it moves within. It's the pause you notice in your thoughts, the extra breath before you speak, the faint shift in how you perceive what is before you. It is less a thing you see, and more a way of seeing that you cannot put down. You catch it first in reflections outside the ritual, the window pane at dusk, a puddle trembling after rain, the dark surface of water in a basin. They do not whisper, not as the mirror did, yet they carry a suggestion. You look and you sense, not words, not images, but a quiet insistence that you are being invited to pay attention. It feels like the world itself has grown reflective, that mirrors were never confined to silver-backed glass, but exist wherever light bends and stillness allows. The afterimage also stirs in memory. A thought of childhood resurfaces, unprovoked, with new clarity. A moment of grief returns, but softened, reframed. You find yourself revisiting long-forgotten details of your own story, not as if they were imposed upon you, but as if the mirror had left behind a key, and now memories open of their own accord. The afterimage works like a low ember, unseen most of the time, but always warm, always glowing at the edge of perception. And then there is the deeper shift. You begin to sense that the mirror was never about communication in the ordinary sense. It was never about answers or visions. It was about teaching you to carry its presence into your own perception. The afterimage is the true gift, the ability to encounter the ordinary world as if it too were layered, ambiguous, luminous. It is the way a silence in a conversation suddenly feels full, the way a shaft of light in an empty room feels articulate, the way your own reflection in passing glass feels less like repetition and more like encounter. The manuscript called this stage the second sight. Not because you see the invisible, but because you see the visible differently. Nothing is merely itself anymore. A shadow is not only shade, but pause. A reflection is not only repetition, but invitation. Silence is not absence, but presence too wide for words. The afterimage may fade over time, or it may not. Some carry it lightly, letting it slip into the background until life resumes its normal gravity. Others find it deepens, becoming a companion for years, altering the trajectory of choices, of relationships, of inner life. Its form is not predictable, but its essence is this. Once the mirror has opened its conversation with you, something of it remains. The afterimage is not the mirror itself, nor a substitute for it. It is the trace, the watermark, the invisible residue of contact. And though you can return to the ritual, light the candle, open the manuscript again, the afterimage teaches you that you do not have to. The world itself, seen carefully, is enough. Every surface that returns your gaze is now a threshold. Every silence is now a language. Topic 2 ends not with conclusion, but with continuation, because the afterimage ensures that the mirror is no longer confined to ritual. It is with you always, a quiet companion, reminding you that reflection is not a moment, but a way of being. Throughout the centuries, whispers of islands that appear only to vanish again have slipped into the oral traditions of countless civilizations. These stories are not just idle tales told around fires or etched into ancient scrolls. They represent humanity's attempt to make sense of landscapes that defy permanence. To imagine a land rising from the horizon, solid beneath the feet, only to dissolve back into the sea as if it never was, is to confront the fragility of what we consider eternal. Take, for instance, the legendary Hy-Brasil, spoken of in Irish folklore. Said to lie west of Ireland, it was mapped by sailors and chronicled in tales for generations. Hy-Brasil appeared shrouded in mist, visible only once every 7 years, vanishing just as suddenly as it revealed itself. Was it a real landmass, obscured by fog and misinterpretation? Or was it the echo of an actual island? One that sank beneath waves due to shifting tectonics, or eroded slowly into the Atlantic? What makes the myth so powerful is not just the island's disappearance, but the persistence of its memory across maps, drawings, and sailors' logs, a phantom etched into the collective imagination of Europe. The Greeks, too, told of floating islands, realms that could shift position or vanish entirely, carried by divine forces. The Delos of legend, birthplace of Apollo, was said to have once drifted across the sea before being anchored by the gods. Though symbolic, these tales may have roots in seismic activity, where earthquakes and volcanic eruptions gave the illusion of land rising or slipping away. When the earth itself trembles, islands can appear transient, reshaping coastlines overnight, leaving mortals to wonder whether the land had wandered off or been swallowed whole. Further east, Polynesian navigators carried oral traditions of islands that their ancestors once visited, but which could no longer be found. These were not mere stories, but navigational references, coordinates passed through chance and memory. For a seafaring people whose survival depended on the precise mapping of stars and currents, the loss of an island meant more than myth. It meant a break in the map of existence. If such islands had eroded or sunk, their disappearance would echo through generations, transformed into legend. Even medieval explorers of the North Atlantic reported sighting islands like Friesland or Buss Island, drawn repeatedly on maps despite later expeditions failing to find them. These phantom islands remained in atlases for centuries, suggesting that belief in their existence was often stronger than evidence to the contrary. One could argue that cartographers, faced with incomplete knowledge, chose to err on the side of imagination. But what if these sightings were not mistakes? What if the islands had truly been there once, resting briefly above the sea before returning to the depths? These myths, whether Celtic, Greek, or Polynesian, carry a resonance that scientific explanations alone cannot strip away. They suggest that the phenomenon of disappearing islands is not confined to modern observation or geological analysis. It is as old as the human need to explain the world's uncertainties. Each story represents a mirror of awe, a reminder that the ground beneath us may not be as eternal as we assume. And in these stories lies a subtle truth. Whether the result of natural upheavals, mirages, or the trickery of memory, the idea of a vanishing island forces us to confront a question we rarely ask. What if even the most solid land is but a temporary guest upon the ocean's surface? The Middle Ages were an era when the map of the world was still soft, pliable, like clay awaiting form. For sailors braving uncharted waters, each journey was not just a test of courage, but an act of creation. Every sighting, every shoreline, every vague shadow on the horizon became a possibility, a candidate for inclusion in the great atlases that shaped Europe's understanding of Earth. And yet, with this expansion of knowledge came an inevitable weaving of error and myth, stitched together on parchment by cartographers who often trusted the words of sailors as much as the evidence of their own eyes. Phantom islands were not rare anomalies on medieval maps. They were almost expected. Consider Friesland, drawn prominently on maps of the North Atlantic for centuries. Sailors reported its presence somewhere between Iceland and Greenland, and cartographers dutifully charted it. For generations, Friesland was as real to navigators as any solid shore. And yet, despite countless voyages, no explorer could ever anchor upon it. Some dismissed it as confusion with Iceland itself, but the consistency of its placement across maps suggests otherwise. If sailors repeatedly marked it in their logs, perhaps Friesland was not a simple error. Perhaps it was an island that once broke the waves, before vanishing without a trace. Buss Island, too, appeared in the 16th century after an English ship. The manuscript hinted at this necessity. Do not stay too long. Mystery is not a dwelling place, but a current. Step back before the current carries you under. You see the wisdom in this now. To stay endlessly before the glass would blur the lines between reflection and reality, until you lost your own grounding. The slow return prevents this. It restores the boundary, but in doing so, sharpens the memory of what you glimpsed. The return is not abrupt. It is gradual, like dawn softening into morning. You still feel traces, the faint impression that the mirror is watching, even when it shows only you. You still feel the gravity of silence, lingering like a low hum beneath noise. But the urgency fades. The lesson becomes quieter, folded into the ordinary rhythms of existence. You begin to understand that this is how transformation actually works. Not in a single flash of revelation, but in the slow return, in the way subtle shifts alter how you move through the world afterward. The mirror is not meant to replace life, but to deepen it. And in returning, you carry that depth with you. What once felt like loss now feels like completion. The return is the other half of the dialogue, the moment where mystery hands you back to yourself, asking you to live differently, to notice more, to carry silence and light into every glance, every gesture, every day. Long after the candle has guttered out, long after the mirror has gone still and silent, something remains. Not a vision, not a sound, not a tangible presence, but an after-image, subtle as the phantom shape left on your eyes after staring too long at the sun. It follows you quietly, neither intrusive nor gone, like a shadow stitched into perception itself. This afterimage is not literal. It does not appear on glass when you pass by, nor does it linger like a ghost behind your shoulder. Instead, it moves within. It's the pause you notice in your thoughts, the extra breath before you speak, the faint shift in how you perceive what is before you. It is less a thing you see, and more a way of seeing that you cannot put down. You catch it first in reflections outside the ritual, the window pane at dusk, a puddle trembling after rain, the dark surface of water in a basin. They do not whisper, not as the mirror did, yet they carry a suggestion. You look and you sense, not words, not images, but a quiet insistence that you are being invited to pay attention. It feels like the world itself has grown reflective, that mirrors were never confined to silver-backed glass, but exist wherever light bends and stillness allows. The afterimage also stirs in memory. A thought of childhood resurfaces, unprovoked, with new clarity. A moment of grief returns, but softened, reframed. You find yourself revisiting long-forgotten details of your own story, not as if they were imposed upon you, but as if the mirror had left behind a key, and now memories open of their own accord. The afterimage works like a low ember, unseen most of the time, but always warm, always glowing at the edge of perception. And then there is the deeper shift. You begin to sense that the mirror was never about communication in the ordinary sense. It was never about answers or visions. It was about teaching you to carry its presence into your own perception. The afterimage is the true gift, the ability to encounter the ordinary world as if it too were layered, ambiguous, luminous. It is the way a silence in a conversation suddenly feels full, the way a shaft of light in an empty room feels articulate, the way your own reflection in passing glass feels less like repetition and more like encounter. The manuscript called this stage the second sight. Not because you see the invisible, but because you see the visible differently. Nothing is merely itself anymore. A shadow is not only shade but pause. A reflection is not only repetition but invitation. Silence is not absence, but presence too wide for words. The afterimage may fade over time, or it may not. Some carry it lightly, letting it slip into the background until life resumes its normal gravity. Others find it deepens, becoming a companion for years, altering the trajectory of choices, of relationships, of inner life. Its form is not predictable, but its essence is this. Once the mirror has opened its conversation with you, something of it remains. The afterimage is not the mirror itself, nor a substitute for it. It is the trace, the watermark, the invisible residue of contact. And though you can return to the ritual, light the candle, open the manuscript again, the afterimage teaches you that you do not have to. The world itself, seen carefully, is enough. Every surface that returns your gaze is now a threshold. Every silence is now a language. Topic 2 ends not with conclusion, but with continuation, because the afterimage ensures that the mirror is no longer confined to ritual. It is with you always, a quiet companion, reminding you that reflection is not a moment, but a way of being. Throughout the centuries, whispers of islands that appear only to vanish again have slipped into the oral traditions of countless civilizations. These stories are not just idle tales told around fires or etched into ancient scrolls. They represent humanity's attempt to make sense of landscapes that defy permanence. To imagine a land rising from the horizon, solid beneath the feet, only to dissolve back into the sea as if it never was, is to confront the fragility of what we consider eternal. Take, for instance, the legendary Hy-Brasil, spoken of in Irish folklore. Said to lie west of Ireland, it was mapped by sailors and chronicled in tales for generations. Hy-Brasil appeared shrouded in mist, visible only once every 7 years, vanishing just as suddenly as it revealed itself. Was it a real landmass, obscured by fog and misinterpretation? Or was it the echo of an actual island? One that sank beneath waves due to shifting tectonics, or eroded slowly into the Atlantic? What makes the myth so powerful is not just the island's disappearance, but the persistence of its memory across maps, drawings, and sailors' logs, a phantom etched into the collective imagination of Europe. The Greeks, too, told of floating islands, realms that could shift position or vanish entirely, carried by divine forces. The Delos of legend, birthplace of Apollo, was said to have once drifted across the sea before being anchored by the gods. Though symbolic, these tales may have roots in seismic activity, where earthquakes and volcanic eruptions gave the illusion of land rising or slipping away. When the earth itself trembles, islands can appear transient, reshaping coastlines overnight, leaving mortals to wonder whether the land had wandered off or been swallowed whole. Further east, Polynesian navigators carried oral traditions of islands that their ancestors once visited, but which could no longer be found. These were not mere stories, but navigational references, coordinates passed through chance and memory. For a seafaring people whose survival depended on the precise mapping of stars and currents, the loss of an island meant more than myth. It meant a break in the map of existence. If such islands had eroded or sunk, their disappearance would echo through generations, transformed into legend, Even medieval explorers of the North Atlantic reported sighting islands like Friesland or Buss Island, drawn repeatedly on maps despite later expeditions failing to find them. These phantom islands remained in atlases for centuries, suggesting that belief in their existence was often stronger than evidence to the contrary. One could argue that cartographers, faced with incomplete knowledge, chose to err on the side of imagination. But what if these sightings were not mistakes? What if the islands had truly been there once, resting briefly above the sea before returning to the depths? These myths, whether Celtic, Greek, or Polynesian, carry a resonance that scientific explanations alone cannot strip away. They suggest that the phenomenon of disappearing islands is not confined to modern observation or geological analysis. It is as old as the human need to explain the world's uncertainties. Each story represents a mirror of awe, a reminder that the ground beneath us may not be as eternal as we assume. And in these stories lies a subtle truth. Whether the result of natural upheavals, mirages, or the trickery of memory, the idea of a vanishing island forces us to confront a question we rarely ask. What if even the most solid land is but a temporary guest upon the ocean's surface? The Middle Ages were an era when the map of the world was still soft, pliable, like clay awaiting form. For sailors braving uncharted waters, each journey was not just a test of courage, but an act of creation. Every sighting, every shoreline, every vague shadow on the horizon became a possibility, a candidate for inclusion in the great atlases that shaped Europe's understanding of Earth. And yet, with this expansion of knowledge came an inevitable weaving of error and myth, stitched together on parchment by cartographers who often trusted the words of sailors as much as the evidence of their own eyes. Phantom islands were not rare anomalies on medieval maps. They were almost expected. Consider Friesland, drawn prominently on maps of the North Atlantic for centuries. Sailors reported its presence somewhere between Iceland and Greenland, and cartographers dutifully charted it. For generations, Friesland was as real to navigators as any solid shore. And yet, despite countless voyages, no explorer could ever anchor upon it. Some dismissed it as confusion with Iceland itself, but the consistency of its placement across maps suggests otherwise. If sailors repeatedly marked it in their logs, perhaps Friesland was not a simple error. Perhaps it was an island that once broke the waves, before vanishing without a trace. Buss Island, too, appeared in the 16th century after an English ship. The Buss reported sighting land in the Atlantic. Maps soon absorbed its presence, giving it shape, contours, and permanence. Yet when later expeditions sailed to the same coordinates, they found nothing but the endless grey of the sea. Did the crew of the Buss imagine it in the haze of fatigue, or did they glimpse a landmass now lost, its geology too fragile to endure? Such phantom cartographies extended well beyond Europe. The island of St. Brendan, said to have been discovered by the Irish monk during his legendary voyage, was mapped for centuries as well. For those who believed the monk's tale, the island was a sacred realm, glimpsed only by the devout or chosen few. When explorers searched for it in vain, its absence only heightened its mystique. If it could not be found, perhaps it was never meant to be, a land caught between the physical and the spiritual, lingering in liminality. The persistence of these vanishing islands on maps reveals more than mistaken geography. It reflects the way humans cling to the seen, the rumored, the possible. Once an island was charted, erasing it was not so simple. Cartographers, cautious of denying what countless sailors swore they had witnessed, often allowed phantom lands to linger for centuries, as if admitting ignorance would tear a hole in the fabric of the known world. But what if these reports were not mere illusions or misplaced landmarks? Modern science reminds us that islands are not eternal fixtures. Volcanic peaks rise suddenly from the sea, only to collapse back beneath the waves within years or even months. Shoals and sandbanks appear as deceptive mirages, visible at low tide but swallowed by storms. For sailors of the medieval era, lacking the instruments to measure the shifting face of the ocean, these fleeting islands would have been indistinguishable from permanent land. Thus, the maps of the Middle Ages became palimpsests of human perception, layered with half-truths, vanishing shores, and the stubborn refusal to admit that the sea holds secrets it will not easily give away. Phantom islands remind us that maps are not static mirrors of reality, but living stories shaped by faith, error, and the shifting memory of the Earth itself. When we look back at the maps of centuries past, It is striking how many of them contain places that never truly existed, or at least places that no longer exist. To a medieval or Renaissance navigator, the chart was not just a tool, but a promise, a tapestry woven from discovery, rumor, and imagination. And once an island had been etched into that tapestry, it became more than a fleeting report. It became a landmark in the collective mind of humanity. Consider the enduring presence of Hy-Brasil, Buss Island, and St. Brendan's Isle. These islands survived on maps for hundreds of years, not because explorers confirmed them, but because their absence could not be explained away. The logic was simple. If so many had seen it, if so many logs and testimonies spoke of it, then it must be there. The fact that expeditions returned empty-handed did not erase the belief. Instead, the missing islands grew more mysterious, more alluring, gaining a mythic quality that reality itself could not compete with. The cartographers of those times faced a profound dilemma. A map was not just a record of coastlines. It was a claim to authority, an assertion of knowledge in a world where uncertainty was the rule. To remove an island from a map was to question the reliability of navigators, to undermine the chain of testimony upon which all exploration depended. And so, many phantom islands remained, sometimes for centuries, persisting like ghosts in the margins of human knowledge. Even as navigation advanced and expeditions grew more precise, the stubborn endurance of these lands revealed something deeper. That maps are less about absolute truth than about the stories humans tell themselves about the world. A sailor's sighting became a cartographer's sketch, which became an empire's claim of territory, which became history. The island might not have been there in the waves, but on paper, it had a kind of reality that shaped voyages, expectations and imaginations. In this way, phantom islands blurred the line between geography and mythology. They were at once real and unreal, suspended in a state of limbo where belief was as strong as fact. And though they eventually faded from maps, erased as science sharpened its gaze, their shadows remain. Each phantom island is a reminder that even the tools we trust most, our maps, our records, our science, are products of human perception, vulnerable to mystery. What's more, these legacies echo into the present. The fascination with lost continents from Atlantis to Lemuria owes much to this tradition of vanishing lands. We see in them not only the possibility of lost geology, but the reflection of our own longing for the unknown. Maps today are more precise than ever, but the allure of those old charts, with their ornate borders and mysterious isles, whispers of a time when the world was still half dream, half discovery. And so the vanished islands live on, not in the sea but in our imagination, anchoring us to an age when land could appear or disappear like a mirage, and when the very act of drawing a coastline was as much about faith as it was about fact. Would you like me to take this thread into 3.4? When myth meets exploration next, where we explore how explorers themselves blurred fact and legend. Exploration has never been a purely scientific pursuit. At its heart, it is a dialogue between curiosity and imagination, between what the eye sees and what the mind believes. For explorers of the medieval and early modern worlds, the line between discovery and legend was porous, and it was often in that gap that the most enduring stories of disappearing islands were born. Sailors setting out into the uncharted seas carried not only their navigational instruments but also the weight of stories, passed down through generations. The oceans were not blank voids. They were seas thick with expectation, where every distant shape on the horizon might be the fabled isle spoken of in ports and monasteries. To glimpse land through the fog was not just to see a coastline, it was to step into myth, and once written into journals and shared upon return, such sightings became part of the living fabric of exploration itself. Take the case of St. Brendan's Isle, an island supposedly discovered by the Irish monk during his legendary voyage. By the time medieval explorers sailed the Atlantic, the story of Brendan's journey was deeply embedded in European imagination. When sailors thought they glimpsed an island far to the west, was it the land itself they saw, or the projection of the legend onto a half-seen horizon? Their reports merged with the myth until the island lived as much in faith as in fact. For cartographers, there was no clear way to disentangle them, so the isle found a home on maps. The Azores and Canaries, too, were once cloaked in similar ambiguity. To some, they were the rediscovery of islands long mentioned in ancient texts, perhaps remnants of Atlantis. To others, they were entirely new lands, but their arrival on maps fed into centuries of speculation. Exploration was never conducted in a vacuum. It was shaped by the desire to find what had been whispered about, to confirm the tales of priests, poets, and philosophers. Even as exploration expanded, phantom islands were not so easily dismissed. Mariners who saw nothing often assumed they had simply missed them. Reports of land in the wrong place might be reconciled with shifting currents or storms. And sometimes, explorers themselves perpetuated myths, whether consciously or unconsciously. A claim to have seen land could secure funding, spark further expeditions, or bolster a reputation. In an era where knowledge was power, the temptation to let myth guide reality was strong. What emerges from this is a truth both unsettling and beautiful. Exploration has always been as much about belief as about observation. Islands like Hy-Brasil, and St may have vanished from the maps, but during their centuries of prominence, they shaped voyages, ambitions, and imaginations as surely as any real shore. And perhaps this is the greater mystery. Not just whether these islands ever existed, but how belief in them altered the course of human history. They stand as symbols of how the human mind fills the blank spaces of the unknown, painting them with equal parts wonder and longing. The ocean has always been a keeper of secrets. It breathes in silence, it exhales in storms, and between its tides it hides stories that slip through our hands like grains of sand. The disappearing islands we've wandered through tonight are more than curiosities of geology or cartography. They are mirrors of ourselves. They remind us that permanence is an illusion, that what feels solid beneath our feet may one day dissolve into memory, leaving only a trace, a whisper, a rumor carried forward. Think of Hy-Brasil, rising out of the mist only to vanish again. For centuries, it was drawn on maps, not because sailors could prove its existence, but because they needed to believe in it. They needed to fill the vast emptiness with something wondrous, something unknown. And isn't that what we all do? We draw our own maps of certainty, anchoring ourselves to beliefs, only to watch as time erases them, forcing us to redraw the world again and again. Think of Buss Island, sighted once and then lost forever, lingering on charts like a ghost. What if it really did exist? What if it crumbled back into the ocean floor before science could catch it? Would that make it less real? Or would its fleeting presence make it more precious? Like a dream that you can't hold on to but never forget. These disappearing islands are not just about geography. They are about our relationship with mystery. For as much as we crave explanations, as much as we hunger for facts, there is a part of us that secretly longs for the unknown to remain unknown. We want some places to resist discovery, some questions to resist answers, some lands to exist only at the edge of vision, just out of reach. Because in that distance, in that impossibility, wonder is kept alive. When an island vanishes, it leaves behind more than an empty sea. It leaves behind a story, a sailor's log, a cartographer's penstroke, a myth that refuses to die. And through those stories, these lost lands never truly disappear. They live on in memory, in legend, in us. Every time we stare at a horizon and imagine what might be hidden beyond it, we are reaching for them again. So as you drift into rest tonight, let these islands stay with you, not as places to find on a map, but as reminders that the world is larger, stranger, and more fragile than we allow ourselves to believe. The earth shifts, the seas rise, the islands come and go, but the mystery remains. And the mystery is what makes life feel infinite. And perhaps, if you listen closely enough to the silence of the waves, you'll hear it too, the echo of a shoreline that once was, the pulse of a land that vanished, the quiet promise that somewhere, just beyond the reach of certainty, another island is waiting to appear.